Hello, my name's Luke Gibson. I'm the Director of Business Operations at Mediatonic. There's about 250 of us. We're based in London, Brighton, Madrid and Guildford, and we make video games. My session today is about taking an entrepreneurial approach to your career, subtitled, or Why You Should Never Do an Interview Again, including a necessary digression into the ontology of advice before settling on some actual concrete tips. If you don't know what the word ontology means, don't worry, I'm probably using it wrong anyway. I also don't know what the word entrepreneur means, so you're in good company. So my first big claim is that you should never do interviews. Instead, you should pitch. I think you'll agree that's a strong opening statement. Okay, I'm exaggerating for effect, but there is some truth in it. In the most literal sense, one way of taking an entrepreneurial approach is to start pitching a business plan to potential partners. That's the kind of traditional entrepreneur thing. If you don't have a business plan, though, you might still have an idea for helping somebody who does have a business, so you could try pitching that idea to them. If you don't have any ideas, you can still pitch yourself or even approach interviews in a pitchy way. So what do I mean by that? Just rather than focusing on getting the right answers to the questions, focus on what the interviewers seem to need and helping them build an idea of how great it might actually be to work with you. Pitching ideas is probably the one that I have the most experience with, although I should caveat that I'm not great at convincing people of anything, just at starting conversations that might lead to working together. So, who am I? I'm not an entrepreneur, that's the first thing, but I have had lots of jobs that involved making the most of opportunities that other people didn't seem to notice. My first job was on the fish counter, interviewed for a supermarket job, stated preference as anything but fish. Brilliant. On the plus side, did learn how to fillet whole salmon. Next, I worked in the NHS. I progressed from data entry to IT management to business analyst, mostly because nobody else wanted to do those things. I worked as a musician for a while, learned that it was more helpful to support the music than demonstrate technical skills, and got to tour the world and play at festivals, which was especially exciting for somebody who is technically very average. Psychotherapy, I loved training as a therapist. I couldn't afford accreditation, so I pivoted to doing a master's in consulting that made use of some of the same ideas but applied them to an organizational context. Worked in a digital agency, and I got to project manage the launch of a mobile app, again because nobody else wanted to, then pivoted to ops to help the company scale. And then a couple of years ago, I pitched an idea to one of the founders of Mediatonic. He wasn't sold, but he asked me to help with something else instead. So I've been working there for a while now and done a whole bunch of really cool stuff, from financial planning and analysis to facilities management, which I've really enjoyed. Going back to the pitch thing, I haven't actually done a formal interview since the fish counter. Every other stage has involved pitching to people, though. Most of the time they say no, but then sometimes they'll come back later and ask me to do something else. So I think part of the value of pitching isn't necessarily that it's persuasive in the moment, although perhaps it would be if I was better at it. It's that it gives people a sense of who you are and opens up a channel for communication that didn't exist before. The other thing that pitching ideas to people does is makes it clear to people what working with you is going to be like. And working with me involves short but important digressions into the philosophy of ideas. So, another big claim. One of my psychotherapy tutors used to use a great phrase, reassurance never reassures. His point was that if somebody feels anxious about something, telling them that everything is going to be okay is one of the worst things you can do. Instead of inspiring people with confidence, it mostly gives them the impression that you don't understand how bad things really are. Or worse, that engaging with how bad things are is too frightening for you, which leaves them feeling that things are even worse than they thought. With that in mind, I'd like to offer my own similar phrase, which is, advice never advises. Okay, so again, being a little bit facetious, it's not as catchy, but the problem is advice giving is normally kind of bad psychology. If you're in a position of authority, it risks restricting people's autonomy when it's normally more helpful to open options up for them. If the person you're advising is in a position of authority, it can come across as a bit precocious. So normally it's healthiest to try and model good behavior rather than give advice. Do what I do, not what I say. The exception is in a crisis where people find it hard to think, and sometimes just having a concrete plan of action can get them moving. Another exception is if you're specifically asked to do a talk, so apologies. Anyway, at first this is going to feel like a bit of a digression, but ultimately the next slide is probably the most valuable one in the whole presentation. So what do I mean by advice never advises? Well, there's kind of 4 elements to it: legibility, indexicality, language, and brains. There are some long words coming, but don't worry, I'm going to use pictures And if your reaction to any of what I say is something like, yes, that is totally a thing, then email me and I'll send you my references and we can have a good old chat about it. Right, the ontology of advice. Legibility. Humans love finding patterns and get anxious when things are messy or chaotic. We like things to be legible, so we often impose artificial order on natural complexity and then wonder why our tidy plans don't work. The truth is, it's often hard to know why we succeeded or failed, and narratives are important but often wrong, so you should be flexible with your own narratives and suspicious of other people's. Next, indexicality, or the way things point to other things. We act as if the way we talk is clearer and more specific than it is. Even if it's not always clear what it or you refers to, we assume that it's at least possible to be specific with words. Like, if you're a scientist, you try to be very specific about the exact context where your claims are true, and you are suspicious of anyone that talks about things as if they are universally true. However, for advice, it can either be so contextualized that its usefulness is reduced to basically zero, or so universalized that its truthfulness is basically reduced to zero. Language itself has the same problem. Words point at, but are always slightly separate from, the concept that they're trying to describe. You might not notice it with some concrete nouns like dog, but it's harder to agree on what fun means when people seem to enjoy things that are unpleasant or bad for them. What's more, words can often only be explained through their relationship to other words. A mansion is a big house, left is the opposite of right. This diagram doesn't even have a section for what a thing actually is in the world of experiences. Side note, by the way, the study of what things actually are is ontology, so hashtag now you know. Then brains. Even if there were no issues with the above, information being communicated still has to survive the weird sifting and sorting of human brains, each with their own associations and opinions about things. We think we're being very clear, but sometimes what people hear is very different from what we intend. Long story short, I don't know for sure that what I believe is true, I don't know for sure that what I say is accurate in your context, and I don't know for sure that what you'll hear is what I intend to say anyway. But if you're stuck, or just looking for concrete advice, what follows are my thoughts on taking an entrepreneurial approach to your career. And if you're doing rather well, thanks, in just watching out of curiosity, remember this is probably the most valuable page in the whole thing. Right, so with that kind of long but essential warning out of the way, here are my thoughts on how to take an entrepreneurial approach to your career. It's about finding an opportunity, making the most of it, leaving a legacy, and enjoying the ending. So on the first one way of finding an opportunity is to just make a map of everybody you know and what they do. Then you can go through the list and think about what feels interesting or relevant to you. If nothing seems exciting, it suggests that you yourself might be a pretty boring person, so go and work on that first. But once you've got a few people in mind, the next step is to go and talk to them. It helps if you like coffee, as that's a low intensity meeting, but if you don't feel comfortable, you could try chatting to them at a networking event first. The goal is to learn as much as possible about the person, the work they're doing, and the problems that they have. What do they need doing that nobody else wants to do? And the trick is looking for difficult and unsexy things that are not appealing to other people. There's less competition for the work and more gratitude for doing it. Some people hate commuting or customer service. Other people really don't mind those things. So have a think about the things that people tend to hate but you secretly enjoy. Next, taking ownership, making the most of things rather. So taking ownership is the first one. That's a really broad category of things. So once you've found something that needs doing, really own the problem as your own and don't act like an external consultant. If something goes wrong, own the mistake, even if it feels like somebody else was at fault. Blaming others robs you of your autonomy, but accepting the responsibility helps you see that there's a route forward. As a manager of a team, you'd need to drive momentum and use your authority. You're there to help people get their work done. It's serving, not dictating, so don't be a jerk. But maintaining momentum involves setting ambitious pace and expectations, and that isn't always going to be comfortable for you or other people. So building comfort with your own authority can be harder than it looks. Another point of making the most of it, bringing energy. Some people tend to energize a room, others tend to kind of deflate it. So figure out what energizes you and use your energy to fuel others. For me, it's like taking pleasure in small things like coffee or a well-written email. Sounds silly. Pushing myself to be more vocal about the awesome things I notice people doing that can go kind of unspoken if I'm feeling busy. And then bridging worlds. People get really stuck in these polarized positions, like they say, I'm a big picture person or I'm a details person. creative versus commercial, strategic versus operations. So we can bring people together by bridging the two. We need both types of people, so help interpret them to each other. I've got a classic consultants 2x2 on this. So how much you care about outcomes versus how much you care about costs. One of the key things about being entrepreneurial is having the mindset of always caring about the best quality at the lowest cost. You imagine what it's like to actually start your own company. You're anxious about both of those things in equal measure. So try not to fall into the trap of the stereotypical accountant in the top left who kind of cuts costs at the expense of quality, or equally don't fall into the trap of the stereotypical creative in the bottom right quadrant who says quality isn't possible unless we sell our children. Next, leaving a legacy. So I mean this more in the sense of having impact and being remembered. Part of this is trying to always take somebody with you. As much as possible, let at least one person see what you're doing in detail. Invite them to meetings, give them context, share how you make sense of things. Aim to make yourself redundant and let them slowly take over. Doesn't always work, but if it does, it's a very efficient way of scaling. Another part of having an impact is making changes to how your organization works. Most people tend to notice things they think could be done better at work. But like I mentioned earlier around advice, there is always a risk of getting seduced by simplistic ideals just because they're legible, ignoring possible second-order effects. Plus, there's an art to facilitating change without winding people up. People hate being told what to do, so don't try to push process or culture change on their own. One way of navigating that is to stay grounded in getting things done. So if you spotted something that could be better, don't launch a project for making X better. Do something urgent that everybody wants done and change X as you go. This relates to the idea of wu wei, or effortless action, describes when things feel spontaneous and inevitable rather than forced, like being in the zone, swimming with the current, bending with the wind, letting go of ideals. For example, if you send out comms guidelines or a spreadsheet template, it can feel restrictive or annoying to people. But every project needs communication and spreadsheets, so lead by example. Then, if somebody needs help with their comms or sheets later, you'll be better positioned to offer the same material in a more supportive way. So look for opportunities to act effortlessly. Like God says to Bender, when you do things right, people won't be sure you've done anything at all. You can make good practice seem simple and obvious where it might have felt impossible before. Then finally, enjoying the ending. Endings are really important, but we tend to neglect them compared to beginnings. I'm not so much talking about leaving companies or starting new jobs, although sometimes it might mean that. Even growth within a company or within a role means dealing with endings, coming to the end of a project or a piece of work, for example. So growing by letting go. The faster your company grows, the more often you'll need to let go of something that you built confidence and security in. That can leave you feeling really weird and superfluous, especially if you hand over to somebody who's better at it than you. And if you're like me, an operations person in a scaling business, you're often patching holes until you can hire a professional to do something, so you're going to feel this a lot. Keeping a distributed identity is about having more going on in your life than just that one thing, so you can ride out a weird patch in one area by focusing on another. Delegation and succession. Be generous with your successor, whoever that is. Give them everything they need to do it better than you, including space to do things their own way. And then finding the next thing. There's always more things that need doing, especially in a changing environment. So stay curious and listen for what other people are struggling with. I think there's also something about understanding your personal set point between stability and novelty. So too much stability and I get bored, too much novelty and I feel overwhelmed. It's healthy to feel bored or overwhelmed at times. It shows me that I found something that I can do easily or that I'm pushing myself to grow. But I think it's wise to act before things go too far in either direction. It's okay to back off from personal growth every now and then. Cool. So thanks for listening. If you've got any follow-up questions or thoughts of your own, please do let me know. Email or Twitter is fine. But just to zoom out for a second and comment what I was doing rather than what I said. On one level, you can take what I've said as practical advice, and I do hope that what I've said is helpful to some people. Particularly at the moment, we're still in lockdown because of COVID-19. That's why I'm sitting down to do a presentation, which feels really weird. It's really hard to predict what life is going to be like when all of this is over, and what things will never go back to how they were before, and what new opportunities might come up as a result. But I think the real value of a talk like this is not what I say, but the way I say it. So my real hope is that it's evident from what I said that it's okay to play with ideas, to make big claims and then interrogate them and say that they're not the case, to keep things surprising, to call yourself out, and to switch gears between intellectual and practical stuff. Anyways, Life is short, so go and be entrepreneurial. Thanks for listening.